In this lecture, I want to talk about sentence types in the English language. Why? Style is all about variety to keep our language lively and interesting. For that reason, we should use a variety of sentence styles in most types of writing. So, we've already looked briefly at sentence types when we were introduced to the basics of sentence types in our discussion of clauses. So, in this lecture, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the four types of sentences in the English language: the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and the compound complex sentence. All right, let's start with the first type of sentence, the simple sentence. By definition, a simple sentence is a sentence that contains one independent clause. Usually it's one subject, one verb, one complete thought. So let's look at some examples. The class is quiet. Simple sentence. Class is the subject, is the verb, and quiet, as we've learned, is the predicate adjective. Is the linking verb. Second example. This class and all the others are empty today. All right, we have two subjects, class and all the others. But we only have one verb, are, and both subjects apply to that one verb. So even though we have a compound subject, we have a single verb, so this is still a simple sentence. The next example. This class is quiet and seems to be stunned. Here we have the reverse of the previous sentence. Here we have one subject and two verbs, two linking verbs. Class is the subject, and we have a compound linking verb, is and seems. Both verbs apply back to one subject, therefore this is a simple sentence. Class is quiet, class is stunned, or class seems stunned. We have one single idea, one complete thought, one independent clause. The next example, and this is probably the one that will confuse most people. This class and the others are quiet and seem stunned. Now, why is this still a simple sentence? We have a compound subject and we have a compound verb. Subject, class, and others. Verb, are, and seem. But both of the subjects precede both of the verbs. So we have a compound subject and we have a compound verb. This is a simple sentence because both subjects apply to both verbs. If this sentence were written differently, this class is quiet and the others seem stunned, then that would be a compound sentence, two independent clauses. But that means something different. This class is quiet and the others are stunned. That means one class is quiet and the others are stunned. But when I say this class and the others are quiet and stunned, that means that both classes are quiet, or all of the classes are quiet, and all of the classes are stunned. So grammatically, this is a simple sentence. The next example. Hanging on to the window ledge, Tasha was able to escape the fire in her room. This is still a simple sentence. Remember that the definition of a simple sentence is one main clause, one subject, which is Tasha, and one verb, which is was. Many would be tempted to call hanging onto the ledge a dependent or subordinating clause. But remember, the definition of a clause is that it must contain a verb and a subject. Hanging onto the window ledge is not a clause. It is a participial phrase. So this is still a simple sentence. And then finally, we have the simplest of simple sentence, a one-word sentence. Here, eat. It's a simple sentence because it just has one verb, and the subject, you, is understood. This is a command form of the English language, also known as evocative. It's grammatically a complete sentence because the subject is understood. It's ordering somebody to do something, and therefore the subject is explicit. It does not need to be stated. Eat is a complete thought. So this is a simple sentence. The second type of sentence that we have in the English language is the compound sentence. By definition, a compound sentence is a sentence that contains two or more independent clauses. It's important to note it can contain two, but it also can contain more than two independent clauses. And it does not contain any dependent clauses. The sentence is composed solely of independent clauses. So let's look at an example. James Cameron is an amazing director, semicolon. His film Avatar is even more spectacular than Titanic. This is two independent clauses that can make a compound sentence that are joined by a semicolon. And as we learned in the semicolon lecture, that is one way to join two independent clauses into a compound sentence using a semicolon. All right, we have here Cameron. James Cameron is subject number one. Is the verb number one. In the second independent clause, Avatar or film Avatar is the subject, and is the verb number two, and we have them joined by a semicolon. Another way to create a compound sentence is to join two simple sentences, two independent clauses, with a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys, together with a comma. So we have an example here. I will order an espresso, comma, and she will have a tea. In this sentence, we have two simple sentences, two independent clauses that are combined with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. In the first subject is I, the second, and the first verb is will order, future tense, and the second subject is she, and the second verb is will have, present tense. So we two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction and a comma. It's the only way to create compound sentences is either joined by a semicolon or joined by a comma and a coordinating conjunction. I think it bears pointing out that in the previous slide when we talked about compound sentences, that although a compound sentence has two independent clauses, the clauses have to be logically related. Otherwise, a compound sentence doesn't make any sense. For the third type of sentence that I want to look at, the complex sentence, the same is true. There needs to be some connection between the independent clause and the dependent clause for the sentence to make sense. So by definition, a complex sentence is a sentence that contains one independent clause, one and only one independent clause, and one or more dependent clauses. So let's look at a few examples. After I read the article, comma, I disagreed with the author even more than before. Here we have a main clause, I disagreed with the author even more than before. And we have a dependent clause, after I read the article. It starts with a subordinating conjunction after. It's an introductory clause, so it ends in a comma. And we see the connection. It makes sense to say that there's a cause and effect here. I read the article, I disagree with the author even more. So after I read the article, I disagreed with the author. That's a classic complex sentence. Another example. The man who wins the most primaries will receive the nomination in Philadelphia. Not going to end the sentence there. We've got a relative clause that begins with who wins the most primaries, and that, as we've already learned, a relative clause is another type of dependent clause. So instead of starting with a subordinating conjunction, it starts with a relative pronoun, and it is in the sentence making the main clause, the man will receive the nomination in Philadelphia. So who wins the most primaries has a subject who, has a verb wins. It's a dependent clause embedded in the middle of the sentence. Now, what makes this particular example interesting is that we have a second dependent clause where the convention will be held. Here in this second dependent clause, we have the subordinating conjunction where, we have the subject convention, and we have the verb will be held. So here's an example. It's still a complex sentence, even though it has two dependent clauses. It's a complex sentence because it only has one independent clause. A final point to make here is that sometimes when we use dependent clauses, we omit the relative pronoun that. It's not okay to omit who, it's not okay to omit which, but it is okay to omit that sometimes. So here I have an example. I think I should go home. I should go home is still a dependent clause, even though we have omitted the relative pronoun that. We could write the sentence with the pronoun saying, I think that I should go home, and that's a perfectly acceptable sentence. But you'll find people want to omit that, the word that, in writing as well as in spoken English to make the sentence briefer. So both of them are purely acceptable, and they also are both still complex sentences. The final sentence type in the English language that I want to look at is the compound complex sentence. And as you can guess, if the complex sentence has one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses, then the compound complex sentence is going to have two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. So it's a combination of the compound sentence and the complex sentence. So let's look at a few examples. After we ate dinner. After we ate dinner is a dependent clause. It starts with a subordinate conjunction. The subject is we. The verb is ate. My son wanted to go to the movies. My son wanted to go to the movies is an independent clause that expresses a complete thought. Son wanted to go to the movies. Then we have a comma followed by a coordinating conjunction, but, and then another independent clause. I just wanted to go home to puke. So we have one dependent clause, two independent clauses. That creates a compound complex sentence. All right, the final example, which is admittedly complicated, but you can see as I work through it, you'll see that it is a compound complex sentence because it has two independent clauses and actually three dependent clauses. Dr. Delgado said, "You performed well." You performed well is a relative clause. The that is missing. You could say, Dr. Delgado said that you performed well. So that's a dependent clause. It has a subject, you, it has a verb performed. But he told me, that's a second independent clause. Dr. Delgado said you performed well. Subject verb, the object is you performed well, comma, and then we have a coordinating conjunction but, and then we have another independent clause. He told me. Now, what did he tell me? The object of told is another relative clause. You had some trouble with a chapter. You had some trouble with a chapter is another relative clause where the that is missing. So we could rewrite the sentence to say, but he told me that you had some trouble with a chapter. And then we have a third relative clause that is actually an adjective describing which chapter I had trouble with. So you had worked on the week before. You is the subject of the third dependent clause. Had worked is the verb. Again, I could insert that before you. So if I want to put all the that's back in, Dr. Delgado said that you performed well, but he told me that you had some trouble with a chapter that you had worked on the week before. Two independent clauses, one dependent clause associated with the first independent clause, and two dependent clauses associated with the second independent clause. This is a compound complex sentence.